A wealthy millionaire CEO comforts a crying toddler at a restaurant, then discovers the child's mother is his ex-wife. Step away from my daughter. Now. Piper's voice cut through the exclusive restaurant like a blade. The billionaire CEO slowly turned around, and when their eyes met, her world shattered. "Hello, Piper. You have got to be kidding me," she whispered, scooping her 18-month-old daughter into her arms. "Of all the restaurants in New York City, Dada?" Lily reached out toward the stranger, and Piper's blood turned to ice. "She's never said that word before." Piper's voice cracked. "I went to the bathroom for 2 minutes, and I come back to find you. Those are my eyes, aren't they?" Jackson's voice was barely a whisper. "Piper, tell me the truth. Is she mine?" "You lost the right to ask me anything the night you chose your company over our relationship," Piper snapped, backing toward the exit. "Stay away from us. Please." His voice broke completely. "Don't walk away again. Not when I've just found out I have a daughter." Welcome back to Lux Love Chronicles, where extraordinary love stories unfold before your very eyes. I'm Mr. Wentworth, and if that conversation just gave you chills, you're about to witness one of the most powerful stories of strength, motherhood, and the impossible choices we face when our past collides with our present. Now, before we dive deep into Piper's incredible journey, do me a favor. If you believe in the power of a mother's love to move mountains, smash that like button right now. And if you're new here, hit subscribe because trust me, the stories we share here will remind you of your own strength when you need it most. I'm not going to waste your time because this story is absolutely packed with the kind of emotional twist that will have you questioning everything you think you know about second chances, forgiveness, and what it really means to protect the ones you love. So let's dive right into the life of Piper Coleman, a woman who was about to face the ultimate test of everything she'd built to protect herself and her daughter. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Piper's design studio in Brooklyn, casting warm light across fabric samples and architectural drawings that represented 2 years of building something from nothing. At 28, she had transformed a devastating heartbreak into the foundation of a thriving business that meant everything to her. Ecolux Interiors, read the elegant sign on her door, and every client who walked through it got to see what happened when creativity met determination. Piper Coleman had made a name for herself in sustainable design, creating beautiful spaces that didn't cost the earth, literally. "Mama, look," Lily called from her playpen in the corner of the studio, holding up a block tower that defied every law of physics, but somehow stood proudly anyway. "That's incredible, baby girl," Piper said, her heart swelling with the pride that came 50 times a day when she looked at her daughter. Lily was 18 months of pure joy, copper curls that caught light like spun gold, and hazel eyes that held more wisdom than seemed possible for someone so small. Piper's phone buzzed with a text from her client, Mrs. Hartwell, whose Park Slope renovation had just been featured in Sustainable Living magazine. "Piper, the photos are stunning. You've created something magical. Dinner at Rosewood tonight to celebrate? My treat, 7 p.m. Rosewood." Piper's stomach did a little flip at the name. She'd never been to Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, had never moved in circles where a single meal cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. But Mrs. Hartwell insisted, and this feature could launch her business to the next level. "What do you think, Lily Bear?" Piper asked, scooping her daughter up and spinning her around. "Should Mama celebrate her big magazine feature at a fancy restaurant?" Lily giggled and clapped her hands, which Piper took as enthusiastic approval. 2 hours later, Piper stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the simple black dress she'd bought for exactly these kinds of occasions. It wasn't designer. Her budget didn't stretch that far, but it was elegant and made her feel confident. She'd learned the hard way that confidence was the most important accessory a single mother could wear. "You look beautiful, Mama," said Jenny, her neighbor and the closest thing Lily had to a grandmother since Piper's own mother lived 3,000 miles away in Oregon. "Are you sure you don't mind watching her?" Piper asked, even though Jenny had been Lily's honorary grandmother since the day they'd moved into the apartment building. "Are you kidding? Lily and I have a date with finger paints in that new Disney movie. You go celebrate your success, honey. You've earned it." Rosewood was everything Piper had imagined and nothing she'd expected. Yes, it was opulent, crystal chandeliers, mahogany everything, and art that probably cost more than her annual income. But there was also something warm about it, something that whispered of celebrations and important moments rather than just showing off wealth. Mrs. Hartwell, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a sharp business mind, was already seated at their table when Piper arrived. "Piper, darling, you look absolutely radiant." Mrs. Hartwell rose to embrace her. "I've already ordered champagne. We're celebrating properly tonight." For an hour, they talked about the magazine feature, about Piper's vision for sustainable luxury, about the 3 new clients who had already called based on the article. Piper felt herself relaxing into the success she'd worked so hard to achieve. "You know," Mrs. Hartwell said as they finished their main course, "when I first met you, I saw something special. A woman who'd been through fire and came out stronger. I was right, wasn't I?" Piper's cheeks flushed. She didn't talk about her past often, but Mrs. Hartwell had a way of seeing through facades. "Let's just say I learned early that the only person you can count on is yourself. And your daughter is lucky to have such a strong mother as an example." The praise warmed Piper in a way that professional accolades never quite could. She'd built this life, the business, the apartment, the community of friends who'd become family, all while raising Lily alone. There had been nights when she'd cried into her pillow from exhaustion, days when she'd questioned every decision. But looking at where they were now, she knew she'd made the right choices. "I need to step away for just a moment," Piper said, rising from the table. "Too much champagne." "Of course, dear. I'll just review these photos again. I still can't believe how perfectly you captured exactly what I was dreaming of." The ladies' room at Rosewood was as elegant as the rest of the restaurant, all marble and soft lighting, and the kind of soap that probably cost more per bottle than Piper spent on groceries. She took a moment to touch up her lipstick and remind herself that she belonged here, that her success was real and earned. She was walking back to their table, already thinking about the chocolate souffle Mrs. Hartwell had insisted they share when she heard it. A child crying. Piper's head snapped toward the sound instantly, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. But it wasn't just any child's cry. It was a specific cry, a familiar cry that made her blood turn to ice in her veins. "Lily," she whispered, her heart starting to race. She moved toward the sound, her elegant heels clicking against marble as panic began to build in her chest. This was impossible. Lily was safe at home with Jenny, probably covered in finger paint and laughing at talking animals on TV. But that cry, she rounded a corner and saw them. Her daughter, her baby, her everything, sitting in an oversized booth 3 tables away from where she'd been dining. And there, beside Lily, talking to her in a gentle voice that Piper recognized with devastating clarity, was the man who had shattered her world 3 years ago. Jackson Wright, Billionaire CEO, the father Lily had never met. The man who had chosen his empire over their love and left Piper to face pregnancy alone. He was holding Lily's small hand, offering her ice cream with the kind of patient tenderness that would have made Piper's heart melt if she wasn't absolutely terrified. Lily was looking up at him with complete trust, her tears forgotten as she focused on the stranger who was treating her like she was the most important person in the world. For a split second, Piper's mind went completely blank. This couldn't be happening. This was her worst nightmare and her most secret fantasy colliding in the middle of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Then her protective instincts kicked in with the force of a hurricane. "Step away from my daughter. Now." Her voice cut through the restaurant's refined atmosphere like a blade, causing several nearby diners to look up in alarm. She didn't care. Nothing mattered except getting to Lily, getting between her daughter and the man who had already proven he couldn't be trusted with their hearts. Jackson turned slowly, and when their eyes met across the space between them, Piper felt like she was falling through time. 3 years collapsed into nothing. 3 years of carefully constructed walls, of building a life without him, of convincing herself she was better off alone. "Hello, Piper." His voice was exactly the same, deep, cultured, with that slight roughness that used to make her forget her own name. "You have got to be kidding me," she whispered, her legs carrying her forward on pure adrenaline. Of all the restaurants in New York City, she reached their booth and scooped Lily into her arms, her hands shaking as she checked her daughter for any sign of harm. Lily was fine, more than fine, She was giggling and reaching back toward Jackson like they were old friends. "Dada," Lily called out, the word hitting Piper like a physical blow. She's never said that word before. Piper's voice cracked with shock and something that might have been fear. "I went to the bathroom for 2 minutes, and I come back to find you." She was alone, Jackson said quietly, his gray eyes intense as they studied both Piper and the child in her arms. "Crying. I couldn't just leave her." "So you decided to?" Piper trailed off as she really looked at him for the first time. He was older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his dark hair showing threads of silver that hadn't been there 3 years ago. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but there was something different about him, something she couldn't quite identify. "Those are my eyes, aren't they?" Jackson's voice was barely a whisper as he looked at Lily, who was babbling happily and trying to show both her parents the stuffed elephant she'd been clutching. "Piper, tell me the truth. Is she mine?" The question hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Piper's first instinct was to lie, to grab Lily and run, to disappear so completely that he'd never find them. She'd build a good life without him. Lily was happy, healthy, surrounded by love and stability. They didn't need him. But looking at her daughter's face as she reached for the man she'd somehow recognized as her father, Piper realized that some truths were too big to hide. "You lost the right to ask me anything the night you chose your company over our relationship," she snapped, backing toward the restaurant's exit. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was surprised the whole restaurant couldn't hear it. "Stay away from us. Please." Jackson's voice broke completely, and the sound stopped Piper in her tracks despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "Don't walk away again. Not when I've just found out I have a daughter." The words hit her like individual bullets. Found out. Daughter. As if Lily was a surprise, a bonus he'd just discovered, rather than the center of Piper's entire universe for the past 18 months. "Don't you dare," Piper said, her voice deadly quiet. "Don't you dare act like you're the victim here. Like you're the one who's been wronged. I'm not. I was pregnant, Jackson. Pregnant. And when I tried to tell you, when I tried to talk to you about our future, you made it crystal clear that your precious company was more important than anything else. So don't stand there and act like I kept some terrible secret from you. You chose not to hear me." The accusation hit its mark. She could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the way his confident facade cracked just enough to show the man underneath. "Can we?" Jackson's voice was hoarse with emotion. "Could we talk? Privately? Please." Piper looked down at Lily, who was watching this exchange with the solemn attention that toddlers brought to adult drama they couldn't understand, but somehow sensed was important. Her daughter deserved better than a scene in the middle of a restaurant. They both did. 5 minutes, Piper said finally. "But if you think this changes anything, if you think you can just walk back into our lives because you finally noticed we exist, you're wrong." 20 minutes later, they sat in Rosewood's most exclusive private dining room, a space that probably hosted merger discussions and political negotiations, now witness to the most important conversation of Piper's life. Lily sat in a high chair that the staff had quickly provided, contentedly destroying breadsticks and babbling in her own language while the two adults sat across from each other like opposing forces in a war neither of them wanted to fight. "She's beautiful," Jackson said softly, his eyes never leaving Lily's face. "She looks like you, but those eyes are yours," Piper finished flatly. "Congratulations, Jackson. You have excellent genes." The sarcasm was her armor, her way of keeping the crushing weight of this moment from overwhelming her completely. For 18 months, she'd imagined this conversation 100 different ways. In her fantasies, she was always in control, always holding all the cards. She'd never imagined feeling this vulnerable, this terrified of what his presence could mean for the life she'd built. "How old is she?" Jackson asked, though they both knew he was doing the math. 18 months, Piper replied, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on the white tablecloth. "Born 7 months after you made it clear that your empire was more important than our relationship." "After you left," Jackson corrected, but there was no force behind the words. "After you gave me no choice but to leave," Piper shot back. "Do you remember our last fight, Jackson? Do you remember what you said when I asked about moving in together?" She could see from his expression that he did remember, and that the memory wasn't pleasant. You said it would be a distraction. Piper continued relentlessly. You said you needed to focus on the Singapore acquisition, that we could talk about domestic arrangements after the deal closed. Domestic arrangements. Like I was a housekeeping service you were considering hiring. Each word was chosen for maximum impact, and Piper felt a savage satisfaction as she watched them hit their target. She'd had 3 years to refine her anger, to understand exactly how and why he'd failed her. I never meant, and when I tried to tell you I was pregnant, you were on a conference call with Tokyo. You held up one finger. She demonstrated the gesture with withering accuracy, and went right back to discussing profit margins while I sat there trying to figure out how to tell you that our entire world was about to change. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily's happy babbling seemed to echo in the elegant room, a reminder of everything that was at stake. I tried to call you, Jackson said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. After you left. For weeks, I tried to call you. To apologize? Piper asked, though she already knew the answer. To explain. To ask you to come back. To tell you about the ring I'd bought but was too scared to give you. The admission hit her like a physical blow, but Piper had learned to absorb pain and transform it into strength. Too little, too late, Jackson. I was done being secondary to your ambition. So you decided to raise our daughter alone rather than give me a chance to make things right? The question was quietly asked, but it carried the weight of 3 years of loss and regret. For a moment, Piper felt a flicker of doubt, a whisper of the love she'd once felt for this man. Then she looked at Lily, happy, healthy, secure in the love that had surrounded her from birth, and her resolve hardened. I didn't decide anything, Piper said firmly. I did what I had to do to survive. What I had to do to give my daughter the stable, loving home she deserved. And we've done just fine without you. The words were meant to hurt, and she could see that they did. But they were also true, and truth was the only weapon she had against the overwhelming presence of the man who had once been everything to her. Let me see her, Jackson said quietly. Please. I know I have no rights here. I know I failed you both. But don't make me miss everything else. Let me try to be the father she deserves. Piper looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since this nightmare had begun. There was something different about him, something that went beyond the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes. A humility that hadn't been there before, a vulnerability that he'd never allowed himself to show. But she'd trusted him once before, and he'd chosen his empire over their love. How could she risk Lily's heart on the possibility that he'd changed? This isn't about you, Jackson, she said finally. It's about what's best for Lily. And I don't know if that includes a father who might disappear the moment his business gets more interesting than playing daddy. The accusation hung between them, stark and brutal and absolutely fair. Piper had built her life on the principle that the only person she could count on was herself. Letting Jackson into their world would mean risking everything she'd worked to create. But as she watched Lily reach for the man whose eyes she'd inherited, Piper realized that some decisions were too big to make in a moment of shock and fear. One afternoon, she heard herself saying, the words coming out slowly as if she was testing their weight. Tomorrow, if you want to meet your daughter properly, you can take us to the park. One afternoon, and then we'll see. Jackson's face transformed with hope so profound it was almost painful to witness. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Piper, thank you. Don't thank me yet, she warned, rising from the table and lifting Lily into her arms. This isn't a reunion, Jackson. This is me deciding whether you're safe to have around my daughter. And if you disappoint her, if you make promises you can't keep, there won't be a second chance. Do you understand? He nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of what she was offering and the conditions that came with it. As they prepared to leave the private dining room, Lily reached for Jackson with the trusting innocence that only children possessed. When he gently touched her small hand, something passed between them, a recognition that transcended understanding. She knows, Jackson whispered, wonder evident in his voice. Children are smart that way, Piper replied, though her own voice was unsteady. They see things we adults miss. Walking out of Rosewood that night, Piper felt like she was carrying the weight of the entire world on her shoulders. In 18 months of single motherhood, she'd faced every challenge with determination and grace. But this, giving the man who'd broken her heart a chance to know their daughter, might be the biggest risk she'd ever taken. As her taxi pulled away from the restaurant, Lily asleep in her arms, Piper caught a glimpse of Jackson standing on the sidewalk, watching them disappear into the New York night. Tomorrow would change everything. The question was whether she was strong enough to control how. The taxi ride back to Brooklyn felt like traveling through a different dimension. Piper sat in the back seat, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms, while her mind raced through every possible scenario of what came next. 3 years of carefully constructed peace had just been shattered, and she was the only one who could decide how to pick up the pieces. "Rough night, miss?" the taxi driver asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "You could say that," Piper murmured, pressing a kiss to Lily's copper curls. Her daughter stirred slightly but didn't wake, trusting completely in her mother's protection even in sleep. By the time they reached her brownstone apartment building, Piper had made her first decision. She wasn't telling anyone about this yet. Not Jenny, not her business partner Sarah, not even her mother in Oregon. This was too big, too complicated, and too fragile to share until she understood what it meant. "How was dinner, honey?" Jenny asked when Piper knocked softly on her door to collect Lily's overnight bag. "Interesting," Piper said, which was perhaps the understatement of the century. "How was Miss Lily?" "An angel, as always. We painted masterpieces, didn't we, sweet girl?" Jenny reached over to stroke Lily's hair. "She asked for you around bedtime, but the Disney movie distracted her. She asked for you." The words hit Piper harder than they should have. Lily had been asking for Dada at the restaurant, reaching for a man she'd never met but somehow recognized. What did that mean? How could an 18-month-old have instincts about a father she'd never known? "Thank you, Jenny. I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what family is for, dear. Even the chosen kind." Back in her own apartment, Piper went through the familiar ritual of putting Lily to bed, changing her into pajamas, reading Goodnight Moon twice, and humming the lullaby her own mother had sung to her. These routines had anchored her through the hardest days of single motherhood, reminding her that she and Lily had everything they needed right here. But tonight, as she watched her daughter sleep, Piper couldn't stop thinking about the way Lily had looked at Jackson, not with the stranger shyness that usually made her cling to Piper in new situations, but with immediate trust and recognition. Dada. The word echoed in Piper's mind as she sat in her living room with a cup of chamomile tea, trying to process what had just happened to her carefully ordered world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Hartwell. "Darling, I hope everything is all right. You seemed quite shaken when you left. The celebration can wait. Your well-being is more important than any magazine feature." Piper smiled despite everything. Mrs. Hartwell was one of her first clients who had become something like a mentor, offering the kind of maternal wisdom that Piper sometimes desperately missed. "Family emergency," she texted back. "Thank you for understanding." The celebration was perfect. Another buzz, this time from an unknown number. "Piper, this is Jackson. I got your number from the restaurant. They had it from Mrs. Hartwell's reservation. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that seeing Lily tonight was the most incredible moment of my life. Whatever you decide about tomorrow, thank you for that gift." Piper stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. She wasn't ready for his gratitude or his emotions. This wasn't about him and what he wanted. It was about what was best for Lily, and Piper was the only one qualified to make that decision. Sleep eluded Piper completely. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through the same questions over and over again. What kind of man was Jackson now? Had he really changed? Or was this just another version of his need to control everything in his orbit? What did Lily's instant recognition mean? Was there some biological imperative that connected children to their fathers? Or was it just coincidence? What would happen if she let him into their lives and he disappeared again when things got complicated? What would happen if she didn't give him a chance and Lily grew up wondering about the father she'd never known? At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and padded to her home office, a converted bedroom that served as the headquarters for Ecolux Interiors. The walls were covered with inspiration boards for current projects, sustainable material samples, and photos of her completed designs. This room represented everything she'd built from nothing, every late night spent working while Lily slept, every client meeting where she'd had to prove she was worth taking seriously despite her youth and single mother status. She pulled up the magazine feature on her laptop, reading through the article that had felt so important just hours ago. Piper Coleman is revolutionizing sustainable design, proving that luxury and environmental responsibility aren't mutually exclusive. At just 28, this Brooklyn-based designer has created a business that reflects her values: beautiful, functional, and built to last. Built to last. That was exactly what she tried to create, not just with her business, but with her entire life. Stability, security, a foundation that couldn't be shaken by anyone else's choices or failures. And now Jackson Wright was back, threatening to upset the balance she'd worked so hard to achieve. But as she sat in the quiet darkness of her office, surrounded by evidence of her own strength and success, Piper realized something important. She wasn't the same woman who had walked away from him 3 years ago. That woman had been devastated, heartbroken, questioning her own worth because the man she loved had made her feel secondary to his ambitions. This woman, the woman she'd become, had built a business, raised a daughter, created a community of chosen family. She didn't need Jackson Wright's validation or his money or his promises. She had options, and more importantly, she had the strength to make whatever choice felt right for her family. By dawn, Piper had made her decision. She would give Jackson one afternoon, not because he deserved it, but because Lily deserved to know who her father was. And if he proved himself unworthy of the trust that came with that title, Piper was strong enough to protect her daughter from the disappointment. "You're up early," Ginny observed when she found Piper on the building's front stoop at 7 a.m., coffee in hand and Lily playing with blocks beside her. "Couldn't sleep," Piper admitted. "Life got complicated last night." Ginny settled beside her with her own coffee, a ritual they'd shared most mornings since Piper had moved into the building. At 72, Ginny had become the mother figure that Piper desperately needed during those early days of single parenthood. "Want to talk about it?" Piper considered the question carefully. Ginny had earned the right to know about important developments in their lives. She'd been there for midnight fevers, teething tantrums, and the kind of exhaustion that made Piper question her sanity. "Lily's father showed up last night," Piper said simply. Ginny's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "Showed up how?" "At the restaurant where I was celebrating the magazine feature. He was there. With Lily. She'd wandered away from our table somehow, and he found her." "Oh, honey." Ginny's voice was full of understanding and concern. "How do you feel about that?" It was such a perfectly Ginny question. Not what are you going to do or what does he want, but how do you feel? It was exactly what Piper needed to hear. Terrified, Piper admitted, and angry, and confused, and maybe a tiny bit hopeful, which scares me more than anything else. Hopeful about what? That maybe Lily could have a father who actually wants to be one. That maybe I don't have to carry all of this alone anymore. The words came out in a rush, admissions she hadn't even made to herself. But mostly I'm terrified that he'll hurt her the way he hurt me. Ginny reached over and squeezed Piper's hand. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you're the strongest woman I know, and whatever decision you make will be the right one for your family. You've never once made a choice based on what was easy. You always choose what's best for Lily, even when it costs you." The validation meant everything. For 3 years, Piper had been making impossible decisions without a roadmap, trusting her instincts and hoping she was getting it right. Ginny's confidence in her judgment felt like armor. "I'm going to let him meet her properly," Piper said. "This afternoon, at the park. But on my terms, with my boundaries." "Good," Ginny said firmly. "And if he turns out to be a disappointment, we'll deal with that too. You don't have to face anything alone anymore. Piper, you have family here." Prospect Park at 2 p.m. on a crisp autumn Saturday was perfect for Piper's purposes. Public enough that she felt safe, familiar enough that she had the home field advantage, and beautiful enough that Lily would be distracted by all the interesting things to explore. Piper arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a bench with a clear view of the playground. She dressed carefully, jeans and a sweater that made her feel both comfortable and confident, with her hair in a loose bun that said she was prepared for anything, including chasing a toddler around playground equipment. Lily wore her favorite outfit, tiny jeans, a pink sweater with a unicorn on it, and the light-up sneakers that made her giggle every time she took a step. Piper had packed a diaper bag with enough supplies for a small army: snacks, toys, extra clothes, and the security blanket that Lily couldn't sleep without. At exactly 2 p.m., Jackson appeared at the park entrance, and Piper felt her breath catch despite all her mental preparation. He looked different than he had in the restaurant. Less corporate, more human. Dark jeans instead of a suit, a navy sweater that made his gray eyes more pronounced, and an expression of nervous hope that was almost endearing. Almost. Dada. Lily's squeal of delight when she spotted him was impossible to ignore. She took off running toward him with the fearless enthusiasm that made Piper's heart stop at least 3 times a day. Jackson knelt down to catch her, his face transforming with wonder as their daughter launched herself into his arms. "Hello, beautiful girl," he said softly, and Piper could hear the emotion in his voice even from 20 feet away. "She remembered you," Piper said when she reached them, trying to keep her tone neutral despite the chaos of emotions in her chest. "I can't believe it," Jackson replied, standing up with Lily in his arms. She immediately began chattering to him in her own language, pointing at the playground equipment and the other children with the kind of excitement that demanded immediate attention. "Swings," Lily declared, pointing imperiously toward the playground. "I think we've received our orders," Piper said, and despite everything, she found herself almost smiling at her daughter's determination. For the next hour, Piper watched something she'd never expected to see. Jackson Wright, billionaire CEO, getting completely schooled in playground politics by an 18-month-old. Lily led him from swings to slides to the sandbox, issuing commands that he followed with the same focused attention he'd probably once brought to board meetings. "Higher, Dada," Lily shrieked with delight as Jackson pushed her swing, and Piper felt her carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crack. "You're good with her," Piper admitted when Lily finally tired herself out and curled up on the bench between them, sharing goldfish crackers with the generosity of someone who had never known scarcity. "She's incredible," Jackson said, his voice thick with emotion as he watched their daughter. "She's so smart, so fearless. She gets that from you." The compliment caught Piper off guard. The old Jackson had been sparing with praise, too focused on his own achievements to notice hers. This version seemed genuinely awed by what she'd accomplished as a mother. "She gets her determination from you," Piper replied, watching Lily methodically organize her crackers by size. "When she wants something, she doesn't give up." "Like her father pursuing her mother?" Jackson asked quietly, his gray eyes meeting hers across their daughter's head. "Don't," Piper warned, but there was less heat in it than there should have been. "This isn't about us, Jackson. This is about her." "I know," he said simply. "But Piper, seeing you with her, seeing what an amazing mother you are, seeing how happy and healthy and loved she is, I realize what I missed, what I threw away." The admission hung between them, heavy with regret and possibility. Lily, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding above her head, offered Jackson a goldfish cracker with the solemnity of someone sharing a precious treasure. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said, accepting it like it was a diplomatic gift. "That's very kind. We should go," Piper said when Lily started showing signs of needing her nap. "She gets cranky when her schedule gets disrupted." "Of course." Jackson stood immediately, making no attempt to prolong the visit beyond what Piper had agreed to. "Thank you for this afternoon, for letting me meet her properly." As they walked toward the park exit, Lily insisted on holding both their hands, creating an unwitting family picture that made Piper's chest tight with complicated emotions. "Can I?" Jackson hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. "Could I see her again? Tomorrow maybe? I know I have no right to ask, but 1 week." Piper interrupted, the words coming out before she could fully consider them. "What? You have 1 week to prove that you're serious about this. That you're not going to disappear the moment being a father becomes inconvenient or complicated." Piper stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "But understand this, Jackson, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for her, because every child deserves to know if their father is worth knowing. And if you hurt her, if you make promises you can't keep, there won't be a second chance." The intensity in her voice left no room for doubt about her sincerity. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a test, and he was either going to pass or fail spectacularly. I understand, Jackson said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was offering. Thank you, Piper. I won't waste this chance. See that you don't, she replied, lifting Lily into her arms as their daughter's eyelids began to droop. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My apartment. And Jackson, don't bring gifts. If you want to impress her, bring your time and attention. That's all she needs from you. The next morning, Piper spent extra time preparing both herself and her apartment for Jackson's visit. Not because she wanted to impress him, but because she needed to feel in control of her own space. This was her territory, her rules, her decision about how much access he would have to their lives. When the doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m., Lily was already bouncing with excitement, having spent the morning asking Dad to come every few minutes. He's here, baby girl, Piper said, opening the door to find Jackson standing in her hallway looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him during their relationship. Good morning, he said, then looked down at Lily, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. Hello, beautiful. Are you ready for another adventure? Park. Swings. Lily declared, her priorities perfectly clear. Actually, Piper interjected, today we're staying in. If you want to be part of Lily's life, you need to understand what that actually looks like. It's not all trips to the park and special outings. Most of it is pretty ordinary. She led him into her living room, which was currently decorated with the chaos of toddler life. Toys scattered across the rug, board books stacked on every surface, and a basket of laundry waiting to be folded. This is real life with an 18-month-old, Piper said, settling onto the couch while Lily immediately began pulling toys out of her toy box to show Jackson. Can you handle ordinary? The question was a test, and they both knew it. The old Jackson had needed everything to be special, important, worthy of his attention. Could this version find meaning in the mundane moments that made up most of parenting? Show me, he said simply, sitting cross-legged on the floor as Lily brought him a puzzle that was definitely too advanced for her, but that she approached with unwavering determination. For the next 3 hours, Piper watched Jackson navigate the reality of toddler life. He helped Lily with her puzzle, read the same book 4 times in a row without complaint, and even survived the diaper change that required 3 attempts and a complete outfit change. She's stubborn, he observed as Lily rejected his 3rd attempt to put her shoes on the correct feet. Wonder where she gets that, Piper replied dryly, but she was impressed despite herself. He wasn't trying to make everything perfect or rushing through the boring parts to get to the fun stuff. He was just present. Can I ask you something? Jackson said during Lily's afternoon nap, when they were sitting in Piper's kitchen sharing coffee and the kind of comfortable silence she'd never expected to have with him again. Depends on the question. What was it like? Being pregnant, having her, those first months when it was just the 2 of you? The question hit her harder than she'd expected. No one had ever asked her that before, not in a way that suggested they actually wanted to understand rather than just hear the highlights. Terrifying, Piper said honestly. I was 26, single, trying to build a business while growing a human being. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep wondering if I was strong enough to do it alone. But you were. I didn't have a choice, she replied. When she was born and they put her in my arms, I realized that I'd do anything, literally anything, to give her the life she deserved. So I figured out how to be strong enough. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, and when Piper looked at him, she was surprised to see tears in his eyes. I should have been there, he said quietly. Not because you needed me to be, but because I should have wanted to be. Because missing those moments with her, missing the chance to support you, it's the biggest regret of my life. The admission was so raw, so honest, that it momentarily disarmed all of Piper's carefully constructed defenses. You can't change the past, Jackson, she said finally. The only question that matters now is what you're going to do with the future. The next morning, Piper decided to see how Jackson would handle the reality of her work life. She had a client meeting scheduled, a young couple expecting their first baby who wanted to create a nursery that was both beautiful and environmentally safe. I have to work today, she told Jackson when he arrived. If you want to see Lily, it means dealing with the fact that I run a business that doesn't stop for personal emergencies. What do you need? He asked without hesitation. I need to focus on my client meeting while keeping Lily happy and quiet. Think you can handle that? It was another test, and they both knew it. Could he support her success without trying to take over or make it about him? The meeting took place in Piper's home office, and she watched through the baby monitor as Jackson entertained Lily in the living room with quiet games and whispered conversations. When the baby started to fuss, he didn't come running to Piper for help. He handled it himself, walking Lily around the apartment and pointing out interesting things until she settled down. "Your husband is wonderful with her," Mrs. Patterson, her client, observed when Lily's giggles drifted through the apartment. "He's not my husband," Piper corrected automatically, but something warm unfurled in her chest at the assumption. The meeting was a success, a $50,000 project that would pay Piper's rent for 6 months, and when her clients left, she found Jackson and Lily building an elaborate tower out of blocks. "How did it go?" he asked, looking genuinely interested in her answer. "Really well. They want me to design their entire nursery suite." Piper couldn't keep the pride out of her voice. This was the kind of project that could transform her business, connecting her with the Upper East Side network that had previously been out of reach. "That's incredible," Jackson said, and the admiration in his voice was absolutely genuine. "You're building something amazing, Piper. I'm proud of you." The words hit her like a physical blow because they were exactly what she'd needed to hear 3 years ago, exactly what had been missing from their relationship. Back then, his pride had been reserved for his own achievements. Now, he was looking at her success like it was the most important thing in the world. On Wednesday, Piper decided to introduce Jackson to the community that had helped her build her life. It was important that he understand she wasn't isolated or dependent. She had chosen family, support systems, and friends who had proven their loyalty over years of showing up. "Jenny, I'd like you to meet Jackson," Piper said when they encountered her neighbor in the building's courtyard. Lily's father. Jenny's assessment was immediate and thorough, the kind of protective evaluation that honorary grandmothers specialized in. "So you're the one," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I am," Jackson replied, meeting her gaze directly. "And I know I have a lot to prove." "Yes, you do," Jenny agreed. This woman raised that baby through sleepless nights, teething, first steps, first words. All of it alone while building a business that's now getting written up in magazines. She didn't need you then, and she doesn't need you now. The question is whether you're worthy of the gift she's considering giving you. It was a verbal gauntlet thrown down with the precision of someone who had watched Piper struggle and triumph without any help from the man who should have been there. "You're absolutely right," Jackson said simply. "I don't deserve this chance, but I'm grateful for it, and I promise I won't waste it." Jenny studied him for another long moment, then seemed to reach some internal decision. "We'll see," she said, but her tone had softened slightly. "Lily, show Grandma Jenny how you can walk backward." As Lily demonstrated her latest skill, Piper felt a surge of gratitude for Jenny's protective instincts and careful evaluation. This was what real family looked like. People who showed up, who cared enough to be skeptical of anyone who might hurt you, who celebrated your victories and supported you through failures. Later, when they stopped by Ecolux Interiors so Piper could pick up fabric samples, she introduced Jackson to Sarah, her business partner and closest friend. "This is the famous ex," Piper said simply, watching as Sarah's expression went through several interesting changes. "Well," Sarah said finally, "you're braver than I would be." But then again, Piper's always been braver than the rest of us. "She's the strongest person I know," Jackson agreed, and something in his tone made both women look at him more carefully. "Good answer," Sarah said. "But strength shouldn't be necessary for survival, you know? It should be a choice, not a requirement." Another test, another evaluation. Piper realized that introducing Jackson to her people wasn't just about letting him into her world. It was about seeing how he measured up to the standards of the people who had earned the right to judge him. Thursday brought the inevitable crisis that tested everyone's limits. Lily woke up with a fever, clingy and miserable in the way that only sick toddlers could manage. Piper had a conference call with a potential client that she couldn't reschedule, and Lily was having none of the usual distraction techniques. "I'm sorry," Piper told Jackson when he arrived to find her pacing the apartment with a crying child. "She's not feeling well, and I have this call that I absolutely cannot miss." "Maybe we should postpone." "No," Jackson said firmly. "Let me try." He took Lily from Piper's arms, and for a moment, the toddler cried even harder at being separated from her mother. But then Jackson began humming something soft and low, a melody Piper didn't recognize, but that seemed to calm their daughter almost immediately. "Take your call," he said quietly. "We'll be fine." It was a leap of faith that terrified Piper, but she could hear her phone ringing with the call that could secure her biggest contract yet. She closed her office door and tried to focus on impressing the Manhattan hotel chain that wanted to hire her for a complete sustainable renovation. Through the baby monitor, she could hear Jackson's voice, steady and soothing as he talked Lily through her discomfort. "I know you don't feel good, sweetheart. But your mama is doing something very important, and we need to help her by being brave and quiet. Can you do that for mama?" The call lasted 45 minutes, and when Piper emerged from her office, she found Jackson and Lily curled up together on the couch, both fast asleep. Lily's fever had broken, and she was sleeping peacefully against her father's chest while he held her with the protective instincts of someone who would fight the world to keep her safe. "How did it go?" Jackson asked when he woke up an hour later, careful not to disturb their still sleeping daughter. "I got the contract," Piper said, her voice soft with wonder. 6 months of work, enough to expand the business, maybe even hire another designer. "That's incredible," Jackson said, and his pride in her achievement was so genuine it made her chest tight with emotion. "Thank you," Piper said, looking down at Lily, who was still sleeping peacefully in his arms. "For taking care of her, so I could take care of business. I've always had to choose between being a mother and being a professional. Thank you for making it possible to be both." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that partnership didn't have to mean losing independence, that support could enhance strength rather than diminish it. Friday brought an unexpected test when Piper's babysitter canceled at the last minute, leaving her scrambling to figure out childcare for an important client presentation. "I could stay with her," Jackson offered without hesitation. "If you trust me to do that." The offer stopped Piper cold. Trusting him with Lily for a few hours while she was in the next room was one thing. Leaving her daughter completely in his care was something else entirely. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's a big step." "I understand," Jackson replied. "But Piper, I've been here every day this week. I've changed her diapers, fed her lunch, put her down for naps. I know her routines, her favorite foods, the songs that calm her down. I know how to reach you if anything goes wrong. And more importantly, she trusts me." As if to prove his point, Lily chose that moment to climb into his lap and settle there like it was the most natural thing in the world. Piper looked at them together, her daughter safe and content with the father she was slowly learning to love, and realized that this was exactly the kind of trust that would define whether Jackson could truly be part of their lives. 2 hours, she said finally. "I'll be back by 3, and if anything happens, I'll call you immediately," Jackson promised. "She'll be safe with me, Piper. I give you my word." The presentation was a success, but Piper found herself checking her phone every few minutes, torn between confidence in her own judgment and the protective instincts that had kept her and Lily safe for 18 months. When she returned home, she found them in the kitchen, Lily in her high chair covered in what appeared to be an entire container of yogurt, while Jackson patiently cleaned up the chaos. "How did it go?" he asked, as if managing a toddler's lunch explosion was the most normal thing in the world. "She ate about half the yogurt and wore the other half," Jackson reported with a grin that made him look younger, more like the man she'd once loved. "But she seemed to enjoy the process." "Messy eating is her specialty," Piper said, but she was watching how comfortable he looked in her kitchen, how naturally he'd stepped into the domestic chaos that defined her daily life. "The presentation went well?" he asked as they tag-teamed cleaning Lily up. "Better than well. I think I'm going to need to hire help sooner than I thought." Piper felt the familiar thrill of professional success, but this time it was amplified by having someone to share it with who understood what it meant. "That's amazing," Jackson said, and then, more quietly, "You're amazing. What you've built, how you've raised her, the life you've created, it's incredible, Piper. You should be proud." The praise hit her differently than it had earlier in the week. This time, it felt less like an apology and more like a recognition, acknowledgement from someone who finally understood what she'd accomplished and what it had cost her. Saturday brought an intimacy that neither of them had planned, but both of them felt building throughout the week. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm of shared parenting, professional support, and domestic partnership that felt dangerously natural. While Lily napped, they found themselves sitting on Piper's couch, sharing coffee and the kind of comfortable silence that suggested deeper connection. "Can I ask you something?" Piper said, surprising herself with the question. "Anything." "What changed? Between the man who let me walk away and the man who's been showing up every day this week?" Jackson was quiet for so long that Piper thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Losing you broke something in me that I spent 3 years trying to fix," he said. "I threw myself into work even harder, convinced that if I could just be successful enough, the emptiness would go away. But every achievement felt hollow because there was no one meaningful to share it with." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense with sincerity. "I realized that I'd been so afraid of not being enough for you that I'd guaranteed I'd lose you by putting everything else first. And then, seeing you last week, seeing what an incredible mother you are, seeing how happy and healthy and loved Lily is, I understood what real success looks like. It's not in a bank account or a stock portfolio. It's sitting here with you and knowing that I'm part of something that matters." The admission hung between them, raw and honest and devastating in its simplicity. Piper felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble, not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to consider the possibility that people could change, that love could be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than desperate need. "Piper," Jackson said softly, his hand reaching toward her across the small space between them. "I know I have no right to ask for more than you're already giving me. But what we had, it was real. It was the most real thing in my life, and I was too scared and too stupid to fight for it. We were both young," Piper said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We wanted different things." "No," Jackson said firmly. "We wanted the same things. I was just too afraid to admit it. I wanted a life with you, a family, a future that meant something beyond quarterly reports and acquisition targets. I just didn't know how to let myself have it." His hand covered hers where it rested on the couch cushion, and the contact sent electricity shooting through both of them. "What if we mess this up again?" Piper asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at her all week. "What if you decide that family life is too complicated, too much of a distraction from your real goals? Then you'll do exactly what you threatened," Jackson said simply. "You'll take Lily and disappear, and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I lost the two most important people in my world twice because I was too much of a coward to choose love over fear." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his admission, completed the destruction of Piper's emotional defenses. She'd spent 3 years building walls to protect herself from exactly this moment, but sitting here with the man who had helped her create the most important thing in her life, she realized that some risks were worth taking. "One more day," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow is day 7. If you can prove to me that this is real, that you're not going to disappear when things get difficult, then maybe we can figure out what comes next." The hope that flashed across Jackson's face was almost painful to witness. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Piper, thank you. I won't waste this chance." "See that you don't," she replied, but there was no heat in the warning anymore. Just a mother's fierce protectiveness and a woman's careful hope that maybe, just maybe, some stories got second chances. As they sat there in the afternoon light streaming through her apartment windows, with their daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, Piper realized that the life she'd built to protect herself had become strong enough to risk expanding. She didn't need Jackson Wright to complete her world, but maybe, if he proved himself worthy, she might choose to include him in it. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Tomorrow would be day 7, and everything would change again. But this time, Piper Coleman was strong enough to choose her own ending. "Ladies, I need to hear from you right now. Are you Team Piper? Are you proud of how she's handling this impossible situation? Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you think she's showing exactly the kind of strength every woman needs when her past collides with her present. Because tomorrow is the final test, and everything depends on whether Piper decides that love is worth the risk. Hit that like button if you're ready to find out whether this single mother gets the ending she deserves. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn light that made everything seem possible. Piper woke before Lily for the first time in months. Her mind clear despite the magnitude of the decision she would make today. This was day 7, the end of the test period she'd given Jackson, and the beginning of whatever came next. She'd spent the week watching him prove himself in ways that mattered, showing up consistently, supporting her professional goals, respecting her boundaries, and most importantly, loving Lily without trying to use that love as leverage against Piper's carefully guarded heart. But today wasn't about what Jackson had proven. Today was about what Piper wanted for her future. "Mama, Dada come today?" Lily asked during breakfast, her question carrying the expectation of someone whose world had expanded to include a father who showed up when he promised to. "Yes, baby girl. Dada's coming today," Piper confirmed, watching her daughter's face light up with pure joy. That reaction, Lily's uncomplicated happiness at the prospect of seeing her father, told Piper everything she needed to know about the choice she was facing. This wasn't about giving Jackson what he wanted or even what he deserved. This was about giving her daughter the family she was already beginning to love. When Jackson arrived at 10 a.m., carrying coffee from Piper's favorite cafe and wearing an expression of nervous hope, Lily launched herself into his arms with the enthusiasm of someone greeting her favorite person in the world. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, spinning her around until she dissolved into giggles. "Are you ready for our adventure today?" "What adventure?" Piper asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought we could go to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden," Jackson said, his tone carefully respectful of her authority to approve or reject any plans. "There's a children's area where Lily can explore safely, and I hope we could talk about what comes next." Piper studied his face, seeing genuine nervousness beneath his surface confidence. This was a man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, but he was asking an 18-month-old's mother for permission to take them to a garden. "All right," she said finally, "but we're taking my car, and we're going on my timeline." "Of course," Jackson agreed immediately. "Whatever you're comfortable with." The Brooklyn Botanic Garden was perfect for Piper's purposes, public enough to feel safe, beautiful enough to provide a stunning backdrop for whatever conversation awaited them, and engaging enough to keep Lily happy while the adults talked about the future. They spent the first hour simply enjoying being together as a family unit, watching Lily's wonder at the autumn flowers and her delight in chasing fallen leaves across perfectly manicured paths. Jackson pushed her stroller when she got tired, carried her when she wanted a better view, and somehow managed to anticipate her needs in a way that suggested he'd been paying careful attention all week. "You're good at this," Piper observed as they settled on a bench overlooking the rose garden while Lily napped in her stroller. "I had an excellent teacher," Jackson replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You've shown me what good parenting looks like, Piper. What putting your child first actually means." The compliment was genuine and specific, acknowledging her expertise rather than trying to diminish it. This was progress from the man who had once tried to solve every problem with money and grand gestures. "So," Piper said, deciding to take control of the conversation that would determine their future, "it's been a week. What have you learned?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, watching their sleeping daughter with an expression of wonder that had become familiar over the past 7 days. "I've learned that being a father isn't something you can schedule or control," he said finally. "It's about showing up consistently, even when it's inconvenient. It's about putting someone else's needs before your own without keeping score. And it's about understanding that love isn't something you earn through achievements, it's something you nurture through presence." "And what about being with me?" Piper asked, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "What have you learned about that?" "I've learned that you don't need me," Jackson said simply, and the admission was clearly both humbling and liberating for him. "You've built an incredible life, raised an amazing daughter, and created a successful business all without my help. You're not the woman who needed my validation 3 years ago. You're someone who knows her own worth and isn't afraid to demand respect." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense with sincerity. "But I've also learned that partnership doesn't have to mean dependence. That supporting each other's dreams can make both people stronger rather than holding either one back. and that I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I understand the difference. The words hit Piper like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to address the fears that had kept her walls intact for 3 years. This wasn't the man who had made her feel like an accessory to his ambition. This was someone who finally understood that real love meant empowering each other rather than competing for importance. "What are you asking me, Jackson?" Piper said, needing to hear him say it clearly. "I'm asking for the chance to be your partner," he said simply. "Not because you need saving or fixing or providing for, but because what we could build together might be even better than what either of us has built alone. I'm asking if you think there's room in the life you've created for someone who loves you enough to support your dreams rather than compete with them." The proposal was perfect in its understanding of who she'd become and what she needed to hear. But Piper had learned to trust her instincts over pretty words, and her instincts were telling her to test this one more time. "And what about your company?" she asked. "Right technologies is your life's work. How do I know that the next big deal, the next crisis, the next opportunity won't make you forget about the promises you're making today?" "Because I've restructured everything," Jackson said without hesitation. "I have a management team handling day-to-day operations. I work from home 3 days a week. I've turned down 2 major acquisitions in the past month because they would have required travel that would take me away from Lily. My company is successful enough to run without me micromanaging every detail, and I finally understand that a business empire isn't worth anything if you don't have people you love to share it with." The specificity of his answer, the concrete changes he'd already made rather than vague promises about future intentions, impressed Piper more than any romantic gesture could have. "Show me," she said simply. "What?" "Your calendar. Your phone. Show me what your actual priorities look like now instead of just telling me about them." Without hesitation, Jackson pulled out his phone and handed it to her. Piper scrolled through his recent calendar entries, seeing a pattern that would have been unthinkable during their original relationship. Meetings scheduled around Lily's nap times, conference calls moved to accommodate their park visits, and entire afternoons blocked out simply as family time. More telling were the emails she could see previews of, messages from his assistant about rescheduled meetings, responses to investors explaining that his family commitments were non-negotiable, and multiple emails declining social events that would conflict with the time he was spending with them. "You really changed," Piper said, the words coming out with wonder rather than surprise. "You changed me," Jackson replied. "Both of you. You showed me what actually matters, and more importantly, you made me want to be worthy of matching to you." As they walked through the garden's Japanese Hillampon section, Lily waking up refreshed and ready for more exploration, Piper felt the last of her defenses finally crumbling. Not because she was weak or lonely or desperate for love, but because she was strong enough to recognize when someone had proven themselves worthy of trust. "Mama, look, ducks." Lily pointed excitedly at the pond where several ducks were swimming lazily in the afternoon sun. "I see them, baby girl," Piper said, lifting her daughter up for a better view. "Aren't they beautiful?" "Dad, I see ducks too," Lily declared, reaching for Jackson with the unconscious expectation that he would always be there to share her discoveries. And that, more than any conversation or promise or demonstration of change, decided everything for Piper. Her daughter had already chosen to love this man. Lily had never known a world where her father's presence was guaranteed, but in 1 week, she'd come to expect and depend on it. That trust, innocent and complete and utterly vulnerable, deserved to be protected and honored. "Jackson," Piper said as they settled on another bench to watch the ducks, "I need you to understand something before I give you my answer." "I'm listening." "If I say yes to this, to us, to being a family, it's not because I need you to complete my life or solve my problems or provide for us financially. I've proven I can do all of that myself. It's because I choose to include you in the life I've built. Because I think what we could create together might be worth a risk." She paused, making sure he understood the significance of what she was saying. "But the moment you make me regret that choice, the moment you make Lily feel like she's not your priority, the moment you start treating our relationship like something that should accommodate your career instead of something that should be accommodated by it, I'm done. And this time, there won't be any dramatic confrontations or second chances. I'll just take my daughter and disappear so completely that you'll never find us again." The threat was delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, with the absolute conviction of someone who had the strength and resources to follow through. "I understand," Jackson said, and she could see in his eyes that he truly did. "And I promise you'll never have to make that choice. You and Lily are my priority now. Everything else comes second." "Then yes," Piper said simply. "Yes, I'm willing to try building something together. But we do this my way, at my pace, with my rules." The joy that transformed Jackson's face was almost painful to witness. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Piper, thank you for giving us this chance." "Don't thank me yet," she replied, but there was warmth in her voice now instead of weariness. "Thank me in 5 years when we've figured out how to make this work." That evening, after they'd returned to Piper's apartment and put Lily down for the night, they found themselves alone together for the first time since this all began. The sexual tension that had been building all week, carefully controlled and deliberately ignored, suddenly filled the space between them like electricity before a storm. "Piper," Jackson said, his voice rough with barely controlled desire, "I know we need to take this slowly. I know trust has to be rebuilt gradually. But I have to tell you, being near you this week, seeing the incredible woman you've become, remembering what we used to have together, it's been torture trying to keep my hands to myself." The admission sent heat pooling in Piper's stomach, reminding her that intellectual decisions and physical desire didn't always align. She'd been so focused on protecting her heart and evaluating his character that she'd almost forgotten the intense chemistry that had always existed between them. "We can't just pick up where we left off," she said, but her voice lacked conviction even as her body responded to his proximity. "I don't want to pick up where we left off," Jackson replied, stepping closer until she could smell his cologne and feel the heat radiating from his body. "I want to start over. I want to earn every kiss, every touch, every moment of intimacy you're willing to give me." The honesty in his voice, combined with the respect implicit in his words, shattered Piper's last resistance. When she reached up to cup his face in her hands, it was with the full knowledge that she was choosing this moment, choosing him, choosing to trust her heart as well as her head. "Then earn it," she whispered against his lips before kissing him with 3 years of suppressed longing and carefully guarded hope. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative and questioning, but it quickly ignited into something desperate and consuming. 3 years of separation, of building walls and learning to live without each other, collapsed in the space of a heartbeat. "Piper," Jackson breathed against her neck as his hands tangled in her hair. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," she replied, her own hands working at the buttons of his shirt with fingers that trembled slightly. "I'm sure because this is my choice, made from a position of strength, not desperation. I'm choosing you, Jackson. I'm choosing us." Their lovemaking was a revelation of mutual respect and shared passion. Jackson worshipped her body like it was a precious gift he'd never expected to receive again, while Piper took control with the confidence of a woman who knew her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim what she wanted. "I missed you," Jackson whispered against her skin as they moved together in the rhythm that had always been theirs alone. "Every day for 3 years, I missed you." "Show me," Piper gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders as she pulled him deeper, closer, as if she could somehow merge their souls along with their bodies. "Show me how much." And he did, with hands that knew exactly how to touch her and words that praised her strength as much as her beauty. This wasn't the desperate coupling of two people trying to recapture the past. It was the conscious choice of two adults creating something new and better than what they'd lost. Afterward, as they lay tangled in her sheets with moonlight streaming through the bedroom windows, Piper felt a peace she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Not because she'd found someone to complete her, she'd already been complete, but because she'd chosen to share that completeness with someone worthy of it. "This changes everything," she murmured against his chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his skin. "I hope so," Jackson replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Because I plan to spend every day proving that you made the right choice." The house in Park Slope was everything Piper hadn't known she wanted. Spacious enough for her growing business, beautiful enough to showcase her design aesthetic, and warm enough to serve as the foundation for the family they were building together. "Mama, Dada, look." Lily called from her sandbox in the backyard, holding up a creation that might have been a castle or possibly a spaceship. "That's incredible, sweetheart," Piper called back from the deck where she was reviewing contracts for her latest project. A sustainable renovation of an entire Manhattan office building that would establish her as one of the city's premier eco-luxury designers. She's going to be an architect, Jackson observed, settling beside Piper with 2 cups of coffee and a laptop balanced on his knee. He was working from home today, as he did 3 days a week, managing his company remotely while being present for the family moments that mattered. Or an artist, or a scientist, or president, Piper replied with the fierce pride of a mother who believed her daughter could achieve anything. The point is, she'll have choices. Like her mother, Jackson said, leaning over to kiss her temple. Speaking of which, how did the Times interview go? Piper smiled, still feeling the thrill of professional recognition. The New York Times had featured Ecolux interiors in their Sunday Style section, calling her the visionary designer revolutionizing sustainable luxury. The article had resulted in a waiting list of clients and enough work to expand her team to 5 full-time designers. They want to do a follow-up piece in 6 months, she said, focusing on women entrepreneurs who are changing their industries while raising families. You're amazing, Jackson said simply, and the admiration in his voice was so genuine it still took her breath away sometimes. We're amazing, Piper corrected, gesturing toward the life they'd built together. All 3 of us. It happened on a Tuesday, which was somehow perfect in its ordinariness. Piper was in her home office reviewing fabric samples when Jackson appeared in the doorway with an expression of nervous excitement that immediately caught her attention. Do you have a minute? He asked, stepping into the room that had become the headquarters of her thriving business. Always, Piper replied, setting aside her work to give him her full attention. I have something I want to ask you, Jackson said, and then, to her complete surprise, he dropped to one knee beside her desk chair. Jackson, what are you? 6 months ago, you gave me the greatest gift imaginable, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. You gave me the chance to prove that I could be the man you and Lily deserved. You chose to trust me with your hearts, even though I'd proven I couldn't be trusted before. Piper's own heart was pounding as she looked down at him. This powerful man humbling himself before her in recognition of everything she'd given him. I know you don't need me to make your life complete, Jackson continued, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring that caught the afternoon light streaming through her office windows. I know you've built something incredible all on your own, and you could continue building it with or without me. But I'm hoping you'll choose to include me in your future plans. He paused, his gray eyes intense with love and hope and absolute sincerity. Piper Coleman, will you marry me? Not because you need a husband, but because you choose me as your partner? Not because I can provide for you, but because what we build together is better than what either of us could build alone. The proposal was perfect in its understanding of who she was and what she needed to hear. This wasn't about rescue or completion or traditional gender roles. This was about 2 strong people choosing to combine their strengths. Yes, Piper said, tears streaming down her face as she reached for him. Yes, of course, yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Lily's voice drifted through the open window from the backyard where she was playing under Jenny's watchful eye. Mama, Dada, come see. They went outside together to admire their daughter's latest creation, and as they stood there in the afternoon sunshine, with Lily chattering excitedly between them, Piper realized that this was what happily ever after actually looked like. Not a fairy tale rescue, but the conscious choice of 2 people to build something beautiful together. Now, before we close this incredible journey, I want to share with you the profound lessons that Piper's story teaches every woman watching this. First, you don't need someone to complete you. You choose someone to complement you. Piper's greatest strength wasn't in finding love again. It was in building a complete, successful, joyful life on her own first. She didn't accept Jackson back because she was lonely or desperate or incomplete without him. She chose him because she was strong enough to recognize when someone had proven themselves worthy of inclusion in her already beautiful life. Ladies, your worth isn't determined by your relationship status. Build the life you want, become the woman you admire, and if someone wants to be part of that life, make them prove they're worthy of what you've created. Second, single mothers are superheroes, not victims. For 18 months, Piper raised Lily alone, built a business, and created a support network that became chosen family. She didn't do this because she had to. She did it because she chose to. Single mothers aren't broken families waiting to be fixed. They're complete families led by incredibly strong women. If you're a single mother watching this, know that you are already enough. You are already complete. You are already successful. And if someone wants to join your family, they better bring something valuable to the table beyond just their presence. Third, forgiveness is a choice you make for yourself, not a gift you give to others. Piper didn't forgive Jackson to make him feel better or because society expected her to. She forgave him because she was strong enough to choose growth over grudges, possibility over protection. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing not to let the past control your future. Fourth, love should empower you, not diminish you. The difference between Piper's first relationship with Jackson and their second chance wasn't just that he changed. It's that she refused to accept anything less than a partnership that made her stronger. Real love doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller. It celebrates your bigness and helps you grow even bigger. Fifth, children thrive when they see their mother valued and respected. Lily didn't just get a father when Jackson proved himself worthy. She got to see her mother treated with the respect and admiration she deserved. Children learn about love by watching how their parents treat each other. Piper ensured that her daughter would grow up knowing that women deserve to be cherished, supported, and celebrated. Sixth, you can be strong and vulnerable at the same time. Piper's decision to give Jackson a second chance wasn't weakness. It was the ultimate expression of strength. It takes incredible courage to open your heart after it's been broken, to trust again after betrayal, to choose love when protection feels safer. Vulnerability backed by strength isn't weakness, it's power. As I watched Piper's journey unfold, I was reminded that the most beautiful love stories aren't about being saved. They're about being celebrated. They're not about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone worthy of the complete person you already are. Piper Coleman didn't need Jackson Wright to make her life meaningful. She had already created meaning through her work, her daughter, and her community. But she chose to include him in that meaningful life because he proved himself worthy of what she had built. 6 months after their engagement, Piper's business had tripled in size. Lily was a happy, confident toddler who knew she was loved by both parents, and Jackson had learned that supporting someone else's dreams doesn't diminish your own success, it amplifies it. Their story reminds us that second chances aren't about going backward. They're about taking everything you've learned and using it to build something even better. It's about understanding that love isn't about need, it's about choice. And when two strong people choose each other from positions of independence rather than desperation, they create something unbreakable. If Piper's story moved you the way it moved me, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Are you a single mother building an incredible life on your own? Are you a woman who's learned to value yourself enough to demand respect in relationships? Have you ever had to choose between protecting your heart and opening yourself to love? Share your story with us. Tell us about the moments when you chose strength over safety, when you demanded respect instead of accepting crumbs, when you built something beautiful from the pieces of something broken. Smash that like button if you believe that women don't need saving. We need celebrating. Hit subscribe because here at Lux Love Chronicles, we're committed to telling stories that remind you of your own power, your own worth, your own incredible strength. And remember, wherever you are in your own journey, whether you're building something new, rebuilding something broken, or choosing to let someone worthy into the life you've created, you are already enough. You are already complete. You are already successful. And anyone who wants to be part of your story better prove they're worthy of the incredible woman you are. Until next time, this is Mr. Wentworth reminding you that the best love stories aren't about finding your other half. They're about two whole people choosing to build something beautiful together. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey, and I'll see you in the next episode of Lux Love Chronicles, where extraordinary women write their own love stories.